So between the Mearns Bird Club, Sullivan County Audubon Society, their president was with us on our hike yesterday. Yesterday we were at the Bashakill, which is 20 minutes from here. And once again, when I was most of my life until I was like age 18, if you'd wanted to see an eagle, the answer was just you can't, or they're just none east of the Mississippi River, or just such isolated populations. And so it took forever. And then just the idea that I can drive 20 miles and just stand in one spot and see 14, just amazing to me. So the Bashakill and that association is a wonderful organization. If you're interested in wildlife, they've just got beautiful hiking trails. If you'd like to go and see what presentations they're giving, their hikes. Coming up in a week from Sunday. Actually, they play such a big deal on their eagles that they're from the parking area. There's 2 eagles nest in view. We're hoping that they'll both fledge and not fight with each other, because when you have eagles fighting with each other and they kill their eaglets, then there's less to see the rest of the season. This weekend this later this year for 6 weeks, if you're on weekends passing by the Bashakill, there'll be people with spotting scopes on bald eagles' nests and say, hey, come look if you'd like. And if you're saying, that sounds so great, I'd actually be interested in maybe volunteering in about a week and a half at the BKA is hosting this Nature Watch program. I'm one of the co-directors of that at the Mamakating Environmental Education Center. So we'd love to have you volunteer if you want to just do shifts where you're helping people see eagles. And then if 20 minutes is too far to drive, well, 10 minutes up the road, the Orange County Audubon Society has one of its multiple sanctuaries, and we were there about a week and a half ago, seeing great ducks, the hooded mergansers, the ringneck ducks, etc. One thing we learned, and I apologize to 2 of you, especially to one of you, it was we were betting money that we were going to have our big amphibian night, where amphibians cross the road and go from where they hibernated to go mate. And the air was warm enough, but apparently the ground wasn't. So apparently for those who came and braved the rain, next time we'll get them. The next time will be better. We did see a couple of frogs after you left.
I went back to 6 in the station.
Uh-huh.
The next day we were there, not a bird in sight.
Wow.
Nothing.
Okay. Wow.
The wind came in. I mean, the weather changed that day.
Yeah. Yeah, between the wind and the cold, it's hit or miss. All right. Well, the reason we're here is because as these organizations show, as you show, because so many of you, I've seen you out on the trail. We're all interested in just this incredible diversity of life that we have around us. And last semester we did a lecture series just on birds, and this semester is kind of a little bit about everything, including where all of these things came from. So we'd like to end with birds and eagles, but first, the first question: where did they come from? Because Earth spent most of its history with 0 birds, and certainly with 0 eagles. So where did all of these? Where did Earth get its birds? All right. So I'm going to be going through these videos, and because like the evolution of birds could be an hour talk, and eagles could be an hour talk, and then like the history of birds, as you know from last semester, could be a really long talk. We'll be hitting some highlights. If anyone's interested, my YouTube channel at Dr. Jan 41, all of the videos you see, you can kind of watch at your leisure if you want. Now, I hate to do this, but I'm a teacher, so it's kind of one of the rules. So to start off with a quiz. All right, so the quiz is, was that a bird? All right, good. Good so far. Was that a bird?
Yes.
All right, good. Oh, you're doing great. How about that?
Yep.
Yeah? How about that? Oh, you guys,
Yep.
you rock this. Good for you.
Yep.
But then the question is, how do you know?
Yep.
Well, no one else said, like, you're getting them right. So, like, what are you using to get it right? And I'm sorry, I muted 2 of you because there was something in the background. You don't have to mute. So, like, you can, I'll unmute anyone who I accidentally do. All right, so we have feathers. What? Beaks. Wings. Talons. Okay. I'm sorry. Egg leg. I'm sorry. All right, so those are good answers. And so based on what you just said, yes, you can identify a bird. At least those are alive today. However, oh, and before, just because being a biologist, I'd like to give a slightly longer list, if you don't mind. So if you wanted to, if I were to list birds, like not only would it be feathers, all right, but like there's different kinds of feathers. There's downy feathers, which are just kind of fluffy. But then there's these contour feathers, which have a central shaft. The barbs can interlock. If the feathers are asymmetrical, meaning that they're thicker on one side than the other, then that means it's a good feather for flying. All right. So if you notice here on the red-tailed hawk feather, one side is really narrow, the other side is fat. We can say, you're good for flying. Same thing. Oh, come on. It's like right there. You're teasing me. It's like right there. All right. Oh, it's on the turkey too. So we got feathers. We got arms. So we got all of these features of the wing. There are some unique fusion of bones to make a carpometacarpus. So it's got wrist bones and finger bones, same as you. They all stick together. And then there's a fusion over here with called forming a synsacrum with the hip bones and the tail bones. There's fusion of the clavicles to make a wishbone. So we got fusion all over the skeleton. I could give a really long list, like unique hip bones, etc. So after our list of all of these features, the ones that you gave me, the ones that I could come up with, what's a bird? And the answer is all of the features that we named are good today, but either dinosaurs had them too, at least some of them, or the first birds didn't have them. It's actually pretty hard to come up with a feature that says, aha, this is what makes a bird, that would include all birds and exclude the things that aren't birds. So you did good, and mine I think would be pretty good, but there's a little more to it than that. So if we were to go back to the middle of the Jurassic period, 160 million years ago, there would be feathered things in the trees. But distinguishing between the dinosaurs that look like birds and the birds that look like dinosaurs would actually be really hard. All right. And even experts, there have been like fossils which have been described as here's an early bird. And then they go back, they said a little more, no, we put it on the bird side of the line. Let's move it over to the dinosaur side of the line, and vice versa. So I have lots of videos on all of the anatomy, but once again, just kind of the highlights. Feathers was one of the first things that people had mentioned. So birds, feathers make birds unique, do they not? Well, no, not really, because certainly fluffy scales existed in a bunch of dinosaurs, not even the ones closely related to birds. So these are kind of like related to the horned dinosaurs. They were fluffy, all right? There's a bunch of them. In fact, some of the flying reptiles, the pterosaurs, like Pteranodon, was fluffy, having fluffy scales. So having something other than the typical reptilian scales being fluffier, certainly something that some of the dinosaurs and their relatives had. And when we look at some of the meat-eating dinosaurs and the theropods, certainly some of them were fluffy as well. And somewhere I have a list, I guess, just not there. So if you were to list the ones which could get fluffy, there's a bunch. Let's see some of them, because that's where the fun is, Billy. So this was one of the first ones which absolutely showed. Oh, yeah. Thank you, Dorothy. I did prop it open in case. Oh, okay. No, that's good. Is it not open?
Daddy's home. Daddy's home.
Ew. Hi, Eller.
Sorry, we just needed to get a couple chairs.
Okay, busy.
So
Mondays
this
are
was
I'm not over. It's not over yet.
okay.
Oops.
So this was one of the first ones which could actually be shown. Here's a dinosaur that has feathers. Now, when we think of feathers, I think a lot of you are thinking like of the flying types of things. But just a reminder, feathers do all sorts of things on modern birds. So black is absorbing heat, white is reflecting heat, green can help you camouflage in. And then if you're asking the question, who should you have sex with? Like if there's just one species, like for humans, anyone who looks human probably is. But if you're a duck on a pond right now, there could be like a dozen different species which are a bad choice for mating because your kids are going to die or like they won't be born alive. So how do you tell? And obviously, as you look here, a lot of the females say, you know, my males have the green heads or my males have the black spots here. So feathers are doing a lot. And now with that broader idea of feathers, we look really close at a number of fossils and we see, oh, there's fluffy stuff going on there. Now, if you want to call them proto-feathers, fine. If you're kind of stingy with using the word feathers and you want to call them collagenous integumentary structures, hey, you're free to do that, all right? I think at least we could agree that these aren't scales, that they are proto-feathers to some degree. And actually, some have been preserved in amber. So in Canada, there was some little feathery dinosaur that got too close to sticky tree sap and it got fossilized. And so you can see this is not a scale like you would see on a lizard or a snake, but it's not a feather the way we would know it. You don't see the interlocking barbs, etc. It's in the middle. So feathers apparently evolved in stages. We actually have impressions of them in fossils. We actually have some of them preserved here. And we know of a lot of dinosaurs which were covered in them. And that's exciting. All right. So DeLong is exciting because it was about 6 feet tall. It had feathers, but DeLong is an early tyrannosaur. So if the early tyrannosaurs had feathers, and here's a later tyrannosaur, which is pretty big, you see the size of the people, if it had feathers, then there's no reason that Tyrannosaurus Rex couldn't have been like pink and fluffy. I mean, I know it would change its image, all right, but it's possible if the early tyrannosaurs had feathers, no reason that T-Rex couldn't have as well. Now, I'm going to get into flight feathers in a little bit, but we're kind of jumping up the family tree, so I skipped a couple things. You mentioned eggs. So obviously lots of things have eggs, but birds brood over their nests, and that's kind of a bird feature. But we do know of a number of dinosaurs that did that too, that died. Like here's a parent that died in a sandstorm, you know, and then stayed with its nest and was buried. And there were at least 2 other species known to have done that, brooding in a bird-like fashion. You can see the birds, like the structure of the eggs are a little more similar to birds' eggs than they are to reptile eggs. Just as birds have wishbones, which is really just a fusion of the 2 collarbones, the clavicle, some of the dinosaurs did as well. And I could go on because I love, you know, teaching the anatomy of it. However, you know, the anatomy might not kind of be your thing. So if it's okay, I'm going to just kind of very quickly hit hips, legs, and arms, and then, you know, maybe move on. If we were to look at hips, okay, you and this alligator have 3 bones that make up your hip. When you were a kid, they smushed together and made one big hip bone, but they used to be 3, an ilium, an ischium, and a pubis. The ilium goes up, the pubis goes down but forward, the ischium goes down but back. All right, so that's kind of standard here. Now, when dinosaurs were evolving, this is an almost dinosaur, the idea was, ooh, tell you what would be really cool for muscle attachment. Let's make the pubis really long going this way and the ischium really long going that way. So if you were to look at T-Rex, all right, or like any of these, but T-Rex is really impressive. It's here somewhere. Like when you look at a person, figure out what the thigh bones are pretty easy. Like that's a thigh bone. But you look at a Tyrannosaurus Rex, all right, it has a hip bone, the pubis, which goes forward and is longer than the thigh. It has an ischium, which goes backward and is almost as long as the thigh. So you look here, there's 3 really long bones, about thigh length. So these really long hip bones are impressive. Somewhere, yeah, so here's kind of like, you know, I have pictures of T-Rex, but here's an animation. If that's the thigh, look at that's the pubic bone, that's the issue. Somewhere along the lines, these kind of flip backwards. So the ilium, the pubis, which used to go forward, goes backward. But anyway, here's a dinosaur hip. You got these long things. You have a weird thing where the hip socket is open. All right, so what you should be a bony socket is open there. And the reason I'm so impressed is because then you find this, and this reminds me of dinosaur hips. I mean, look at the long pubis. Look at the long ischium. Look at the hole here, an open hip socket. But this is an emu. This is a bird. And you realize, like, once I know dinosaur hips, all right, you look at a bird's hip and you say, I know this hip. This is a dinosaur hip. All right, so they're so similar. If you go to the legs, let's do legs. All right, so I'm talking to all the hippos. Let's just go to a picture of leg. Where do I talk about legs? It's a good question in all these videos. Ooh. I'll talk about legs. Oh, I want a flamingo. I'm sorry. Where's my flamingo picture? Okay, you know what? I'm sorry. I know where it is. My bad. Another presentation. So I'm going to ask you to look at a picture of a bird. I'm going to ask you, do your legs move like that? So, la, 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 la. We're just doing all our dinosaurs. I'm sorry, there's just a flamingo picture. Where are you? I'm going to be so angry. Okay. I'm so I can't find my flamingo. I'm so upset. So anyway, we're going to be looking at a flamingo, and we're going to look at its legs. And I was going to ask you if your legs bend like that. And it's obviously so much funnier if you can see the video. So anyway, we'll go here. Do your legs do that? Okay. See, you're all wrong. Of course they do that. All right. If you think that they're not doing that, it's because you're looking at it wrong. You're saying, my knees don't bend like that. That's not the knee. That's the ankle. That's the knee. All right. So if you look at a bird's legs, and I'm sorry, the flamingo I was looking for was standing doing that. So when you look at a bird's legs or a dinosaur's legs, the thigh is kind of short. Here's the knee, bending the same way yours does. But then this is all the lower leg, and this is all the foot. So when dinosaurs and birds walk, they're just walking on their toes. All right. And then what you call the back of your foot would actually be in the air. That's the ankle joint. So knowing that, not only do you have the same bones in your feet as the birds do, this is a dinosaur leg. Dinosaurs have that kind of ankle where the foot is really long and it bends really, and I could get into the really fancy things here, but as dinosaurs evolved, that was the thing. Their feet, which used to look like this, all right, just the green bones, the metatarsals, the yellow phalanges got really big. Funny things happened in the ankle, but that would take too long to talk about. And so if you were then to say, all right, well, let me look at Tyrannosaurus Rex, all right, there's the ankle joint. There's the two lower leg bones. You know, we could name all of the bones. But if you could then say, all right, well, let's hold up a bird. There's the femur, there's the femur, there's the tibia and the fibula, there's the tibia and the fibula. Birds have dinosaur legs. Birds have dinosaur arms. Now, I know, you know, in theory, a wing is a special thing. Birds have wings that let them fly, but let's look at the first wings. All right. This is a hand of a dinosaur and this is a wing of a bird. And you would really have to struggle in order to tell the difference between them. They've got all the same bones. So we could go through other parts of bird anatomy, but what you're going to see in this set of cladograms is the meat-eating dinosaurs are called the theropods, and they have a family tree. All right, so there's the early branches, the middle branches, the later branches. And at each branch, we could say, what new things did they get? All right, what new things did they get? Well, a lot of the features are features that birds have. So in other words, here we're looking at the family tree of dinosaurs. Like, you know, Allosaurus would fit in this next group, Tyrannosaurus would fit in the next group, and we could say the members of this group of theropod dinosaurs have a longer arm, have a fusion of their sternal plates, etc. But by the time we get to the end, birds are at the top of this family tree. All right. So if you were to ask, how did birds evolve? The answer is a little down here. So at the first theropods, some of the features that define the theropods, some of that would give birds the ability to fly and make a bird a bird. A little more evolved at this step, a little more evolved at this step, a little more evolved at this step. We talked about feathers. They come way down. They evolved down on the family tree. But then a little bit higher up, we get, and some of you already know this because you were listening to the songs, we get flight feathers. So there's a bunch of dinosaurs where some had feathers. They had flight feathers. Caudipteryx is a nice one, about 3 feet in length. To help it digest its food, it was eating rocks. All right, even some birds do that today. So a lot of animals do. They're called gizzard stones. It weighed too much to fly, so it has flight feathers, but can it fly? It can't. So what was it doing? Well, I don't know. All right, was it like jumping and gliding a little bit? Was it like scooping up its prey a little bit? Was this for to show what species it belonged to or attract a mate? All of these things are possible. Not only do dinosaurs have feathers, they have flight feathers. And then we get Microraptor. You heard the song. All right. Microraptor could be held in the palm of your hand. The end of its tail would have stretched out of your hand, all right, but the rest of it would have fit in your hand. And it had flight feathers on its arms, legs, and tail. It would have been able to glide, all right? Now, at some point, we're going to say, where do you draw the line between gliding well and flying poorly? That's a philosophical question, which I leave for you at home. But if we're going to say, like, these are clearly capable of flight. In fact, there are a couple of these fossils that if you were to say, could they fly? So Anchiornis, we even know what color it was. It was black and white with like kind of a reddish brown crest of feathers on its head. Could it fly? Maybe, like maybe not great, all right, but maybe it could fly a little bit. Rahona was a dinosaur that was first thought to be a bird. Could it fly? Maybe not great, but then again, the first birds weren't really good flyers either. So bird nest evolves in stages. Now I'd like to jump to the first birds after I answer any questions. And there's more involved. We could go into like more detail on the bones and the things that we can find from the fossils. But birds were tens of millions of years in the building, and these dinosaurs got gradually more and more bird-like. You had a question? Yes, they are actually. Yeah, that was actually the one that I was getting frustrated because I kept skipping over it. So when I talked about flight feathers, one of the things you just happened to name it. Somewhere in here, there is actually not only the red-tailed hawk, but there is the turkey. And yes, they are asymmetrical. So how about we just do yes, and I'll find it if I can find it. All right. So about 160 some million years ago, there are now fossils which we call birds. All right. So we're no longer talking about dinosaurs that look like birds, but they're birds. Why do we say that? Well, their arms are just a little bit longer and a little bit lighter. And their foot, which already in the dinosaurs had one small toe that was already kind of curling behind, now completely curls behind to form a perching foot so they can sit on a branch with 3 toes forward, pointing forward, and 1 toe pointing back. So if you were to ask what makes a bird, where's the line? On the one side of the line, you're a dinosaur, on one side, it's that. It's a ratio. Your arms, which were already long, got a little bit longer, and your toe, which was already pointing forward, points forward even more. So not that big a deal, especially since modern birds play with this all the time. Modern birds, owls and other birds and woodpeckers have changed that they don't have the 3-toed pointing forward anymore. So we have dinosaurs that look like birds, and then we get the first birds which look like dinosaurs. All right. Archaeopteryx is the famous one. All right. It would have been able to fly, not well, all right, but it would have flown. But it still has all of these features we associate with dinosaurs, like grasping clawed fingers. Yes, these are wings, but they were also hands that could have grabbed its prey. It has teeth. It has a long reptilian tail. So birds are here, but not hawks and eagles and not ducks and not sparrows. Those things are long in the future. Now, how do we get to those birds? That's a long story and probably longer than we could fit in here. Let me just kind of, if we were to fit in the highlights of that long story. So once there are birds, it will be tens and tens of millions of years before there's birds like that might be relatives of the ones which are alive today, right? And so their flight plan gradually gets better. So the first ones weren't good at flying, and they certainly couldn't take off from a standstill. Like on your deck, you see a bird and whoosh, it's in the air. First birds could not do that. They would have been running starch or jumping out of a tree and then flapping on the way down. The way that like Canada geese or swans have to really work out it before they can take air. That's what a lot of these birds would have done. And so for a long time, they're not good flyers. And it's around the middle of the Mesozoic era as we go into the Cretaceous that they change their chest. And like it's changes in the chest that made all the difference in the world. So there's lots of videos on it, but the super quick highlight is one, here's a sternum, I have a sternum, birds have a sternum. But theirs sticks out to here. They have what's called a keel on their sternum. All right, so birds can fly, and I should be more impressed than I am. I'm really not all that impressed. Because look at the keeled sternum. If I had a breastbone that came out to here and my flight muscles were this big, if I did this with my arms, you'd see some stuff happen on my end too. So yeah, they can fly, but yes, if I had a sternum out to here, I could fly, or I could do something. All right, so that was a big deal. They also then fused their clavicles, and they did something, and they like reinforced their ribs. They changed their center of gravity, so they lost their teeth, big heavy teeth, because that's at the front end. That would be horrible to try to lift all the time. And so then they got a gizzard, so the grinding of their food happens at the center of gravity, not way up here. They lose their long dinosaur tail, because once again, you don't want all this weight dragging you down. Once again, brings the center of gravity here. And one of the super neat tricks, I'll just mention it and then go on, is they fool with the muscle which pulls the wing up. So where would you find a muscle that pulls your wing up? You'd think it would be here, and it could pull the wing up. But what birds devised is it's here, under the wing. How could you pull the wing up from underneath? The tendon goes up and over the shoulder and through this hole. This is the hole where three bones meet, a scapula, the clavicle, forming the wishbone or the furcula, and the procoracoid. So the tendon kind of goes up here, and so the muscle is down here, but the tendon now pulls it up this way. So now the muscle pulling up on the wing is under the center of gravity. So little things like that, all of a sudden birds get to be good flyers, but this comes millions and millions of years after the first birds. Now we have good bird flyers, but we still don't have modern birds. In fact, there's this other group which is really common called the opposite birds, the enantiornithes. So around the time of the end of the dinosaurs, these are the ones which, they're everywhere. And then a big rock falls out of the sky at the same time that India has all those volcanic eruptions. Not only do the dinosaurs die, but so does like 60% of life. So do the most common birds. So if you were to bet money at the end of the Cretaceous, which bird lineage is going to be the winner, you would have bet on the one on the left, but they all die. And so it's the minor group, the one on the right, they're the ones that are now going to take off and then be the ancestors of the birds we have today. You had a question.
With regard to the keel, is that something that arose more than once, or do we expect that the keel originated once and then grading outward?
So as far as I know, arising more than once, that would be an easy one because it would just be like a bone getting thicker. But as far as I know, this bird, which this is a bird, it still has teeth and claws, as you can see. This is called Confuciornis. Still has it has a shorter tail. Those are just feathers. This one was right around the side where like some of them have a slight keel. All right, so here we have before this, no one has a keel. These guys have a little keel, and then after them, most of the birds have a keel, unless you lose it like an ostrich wouldn't have a keel because it's not trying to fly. So coming up more than once, that wouldn't be surprising at all. But as far as I know, no, just once, starting at Confuciornis and then forward in the family tree.
Okay, so I'm presuming that there's no fossil evidence of the same thing on the little foramen that you mentioned that brings the raising muscle to the chest. You mentioned that.
Bird bones, like if you've ever how many times in your life have you find little bird bones? They're so small and delicate to begin with. And I think if you had found them in the fossils, the difference between three bones which are in the vicinity versus actually fused to make a whole, it's possible. I don't think I've ever read like, aha, here we find it. By the time we get to the group, so like the first one, by the time we get to the group, yeah, after this one, like it's assumed that they're either have it or they're it's close. So the bones are coming together. But I don't know if, here's the perfect fossil where we see that. We could. Sure.
The reduction of weight on the head by reducing teeth,
Mhm.
and the keeled sternum, those two things combined. So far as I know, those are not present features in the other two groups of vertebrates that have been fly bats and pterosaurs, right?
Mhm.
They didn't have bats, modern bats don't have a keeled sternum, right? But they have teeth. So
Correct. They do. Some of the pterosaurs, like Pteranodon and some, they would lose teeth. Some would, some wouldn't. So the teeth one, and a lot of the birds kept their teeth. Right, they had that Pteranodon in that case wouldn't be, but a number of them didn't have quite the crest and had smaller heads. Yeah, so that's a good point that the other vertebrates which developed flight, the bats and the pterosaurs, did not mimic everything that the birds did. But then again, birds, like, not to play finish, but birds were better. Like the pterosaurs had lots of little flying pterosaurs until the birds came out and the small ones disappeared. Now you just have the big saurs. So birds were just apparently doing it better than the pterosaurs did. So, good question. I'm sorry, did someone at home have a question? Megumi, was that you? Oh, forgive me, I thought I recognized. So after the dust settles from the dinosaurs becoming extinct, there's just the minor lineage of birds which survives. They then give us the lineages of birds which we have today. Ostriches, rheas, they would be the most primitive group still alive today. Chickens and ducks, you wouldn't have put them together. Certainly the old bird books never would. Like, so the ducks would be at the beginning of the bird book, and then like the turkeys would be in the middle, but the molecular evidence shows that, yeah. So like on the branches, here's one that would lead to chickens and to waterfowl, fowl. And then raptors would be soon after that, although I'll have to define that term. Songbirds are the most common birds, and we can talk about them more in future weeks when we talk about the spring migration. They actually appear like a third of the way into the age of mammals. No dinosaur ever saw a songbird. No sparrow, no bluebird, no blackbird, no crow, nothing like that. They are like age of mammals only, these songbirds, as with the raptors. No dinosaur ever saw an eagle. Now, we probably don't want to get into like definitions, but what's a raptor? Well, in the old days, we could say, oh, it got sharp beak, got sharp, talons, eats meat. It's a meat-eating bird. We'll call them raptors. We now know that the more we study them, especially their genes, owls aren't really closely related to hawks, and falcons are completely in another group. And the vultures, we call them vultures if it's one thing. It's actually two things, like the vultures of the old world and the vultures of the new world, two completely different groups. So using the word raptor as if it's a biological group, really not entirely accurate. All right, in that falcons are actually more closely related to songbirds than they are to eagles. Here's a relative of raptors in Africa. It's got really long legs. That's kind of neat. And then even the term eagle, what's an eagle? I mean, because it's not a good word, believe it or not. Eagles are just big hawks, and it turns out eagles have evolved more than once. So some eagles are related to these hawks over here, while other eagles are related to these hawks over here. So golden eagles and bald eagles are not really closely related. Each of them are more closely related to given hawks. So eagles belong to there are two groups of eagles. There's a golden eagle, not a cousin of the balds. Bald eagles are sea eagles, and sea eagles share traits. They have a lot of white feathers. They eat a lot of fish. All right, and so a lot of the characteristics which we associate with bald eagles are, pertain to their group, which first appear around 16 million years ago. That's kind of midway through the Cenozoic era. Okay. So that being said, I would like to kind of shift gears. Oh, yeah. I would like to shift gears and talk about eagles specifically. All right, because A, there's just such amazing birds, and then this is certainly a great time of year to discuss eagles. Eagles are not the biggest birds in the world. Condors are pretty big. Trumpeter swans are pretty big. And then we could start talking about like who's the longest wingspan, who's heavier, and then even that gets tougher because how big is an eagle? Well, interesting, like there's a geographic range. All right, so up north, it's very common to see that things get bigger when they get farther north, like bears do and deer do. Bald eagles in Alaska are big. Bald eagles in like South Carolina, not as much. And so, like, what's a good size of an eagle? It turns out, if you have such a big continent to live on, there are variations, plus the fact that females are so much bigger than males, about a quarter bigger. So they're certainly big birds, officially the second largest after the California condor, a little bit larger than the golden eagle. But once again, eagles can vary in size from Alaska to South Carolina, females bigger than males. So, there's a lot of variation there. Why did you leave my... Wow, what'd you do? Oh, there we go. Yes.
What are you
Okay,
doing?
I didn't know why it left my
Hey.
Yeah, did someone have a question? No. Okay. So someone on our hike yesterday said they were seeing eagles tussle in the air, uh, uh, which is interesting because that probably wasn't tussling, that was probably courtship. I'm gonna say a few things, but please don't do this at home. Just I'm asking. So how do eagles court? Well, there's some flying high up in the air, and then they like lock talons, and then like hurtle towards the ground, letting go just at the last minute and going their separate ways. Now, has that been known to go badly? Unfortunately, it has, as you might imagine, that there were a couple eagles which have been known that let go a little too late in their plummeting descent. But it's what's called a cartwheel display, and they pick their mates. Females, once again, about 25% larger than the males. They will probably then mate for life. All right. Now, when we say birds mate for life, there's a bunch of caveats that you can throw in, but some of the caveats apply to some birds than others. So, like a lot of the ducks, for example, yeah, they're mating for a season, so they're monogamous. But once again, like monogamous, in that like the males are all fooling around, and while the males are all fooling around, the females probably are too, because then when you look at the eggs, the nest has multiple fathers in it, and so monogamous can mean different things. But eagles are pretty monogamous. If one of the partners died, they might form another partnership, or if their mating isn't successful. So I think I alluded to this, and some of you know, one of the nests at the Bashakil last summer, or two of them actually, two of the three, the eaglets died because there was eagle-on-eagle violence as they were trying to be territorial and say there's too many eagles in too small a space. So one of the questions is, does that pair of eagles split up? Because after an unsuccessful nesting attempt, that's a possibility. And then there are apparently other things there are in the eagle world. Apparently thruples are known, where you can have three eagles hanging out at a nest. So, it's not 100%, monogamous, but it's close. Eagles are pretty monogamous. And so even if they don't winter together, they'll try to migrate back to the same nest around the same time of year. And then start a new nest. When they get to nests, they spruce up the place, a little spring cleaning, and they'll add some twigs, they'll add some moss. One of the consequences is, however, this is one of the eagle's nests, which was not successful at the Bashakil last summer, but you can see this very clearly from the from where you park. It's right there. And there was a pair of eagles there yesterday. So it looks like the two of the eagles' nests that were not happy with each other, both of them seem to have pairs now. So that's so if you go, you're likely to see them. So actually, and that's well, you'll see that tree. Uh, as they build these nests, they just keep getting heavier and heavier. So these then become the largest bird nests in nature. No other bird makes bigger nests than bald eagles. And eventually this can like break the tree and the branches that support them. So one eagle nest was used over 60 years and reached a size of 18 square feet. One weighed 2 tons. And so it sometimes comes to pass that the trees or the branches break and the eagles come and the nests come crashing to the ground. Right around this time of year is when the eggs are laid. Now it's always this year. Obviously, weather plays a factor because in a warm winter, maybe last year's eagles stayed here all winter and they're already in their breeding territory. In a colder winter, maybe they flew south and they're coming back north again. And also, if it's a cold snap, if you lay your eggs and all of a sudden it's too cold, maybe an egg freezes. And we think that a couple years ago at the Bashicle, that's what happened to one of the nests. They were sitting on eggs, and then all of a sudden they weren't. But there was a really cold snap, and so maybe that had an effect. So right around now, there will be eggs laid. All right, and then you'll probably see one parent on the nest for a while. And I saw a parent at each of the 2 nests yesterday. So, I think we're getting around this time, although they didn't stay there permanently. So I don't think like there were eggs yet, or else probably one would stay on the nest the whole time while the other one was feeding. So if you go and you see this, all right, you see a little white head above a nest, then, right around this time of year, that's kind of what we expect, so that they have eggs already there. And then in a little bit, all right, then you might start seeing these little heads poke up out above the nest. But the nest can be so big that there could actually be chicks in there, but you just can't see in there yet. All right, so the chicks are obviously small, and the adults are feeding them at first, and they're so overzealous at first that very often the amount of dead fish around the nest outweighs the chicks. That they're just bringing food, and the chicks are just too small to eat it all at first. But that will then change because and this was a question earlier, eagles can have 7-foot wingspan, and so these guys being hatched in late March, early April, depending on where we are. That means they have to go from like yay to having a 7-foot wingspan and being able to fly by June. That's a lot of growth because birds are like that. Birds are pretty much full size when they fledge, when they get their flight feathers and develop the ability to fly. It's not as if with us, like people, little kids are running around, but they're not adult sized yet. Birds, they're adult sized from the beginning. And so they have to grow fast. Now, that also then puts pressure on them because then like they want to eat like everything. And now size matters at the nest because whoever's the biggest is going to get the food first. And so the egg that was laid first will probably hatch first, so that will have an advantage. And if it's a female, females are a little bigger, all right? So a female that was, hatched first is going to get an awful lot of food. But if it's a good year, all right, whoever's the second nestling should still manage. If it's, there's often a third chick, a third eaglet. Whether they make it is kind of hit or miss because they're only going to get food after the other, they're going to get the other, what the other 2 can't eat. All right, so in a good year where there's plenty of fish, maybe there's enough to go around. In a bad year, the third eaglet, very often doesn't make it. Sometimes the reason, potentially for a third eaglet is you might say, like, why would a parent produce a third egg? Well, things can happen to the first egg, like it could get too cold, it could freeze. There are, things that like, whether it be cats or some birds, which can raid nests. And so having a third eaglet might just give a little bit of extra added security. So they're only a pound or two at 2 weeks, but later they're gaining 6 ounces per day. That is the fastest growth rate in birds, right? And at a certain point, they're bigger than their dad. All right. So that becomes a problem for a dad because the mother is bigger than he is. And now the young are bigger than he is. So whenever he comes with a fish, he's surrounded by birds bigger than him, which are just ripping it away from him. So very often, like they won't let him eat at the nest, and he'll just have to like go to a neighboring tree. So like if he gets food for himself, he goes nowhere near the nest, or else it's not his food anymore. They obviously are going to start flying. But this is like if you're a big bird, and you've never flown before, like this could be ugly at first. And so sometimes they do crash to the ground. And then the adults would continue to feed them on the ground, and kind of encourage them to go. The adults might kind of encourage them by like bringing food to the nest, but not actually to the nest, like to a branch near the nest. The young would have to like make a quick little, hop or a flight, to practice that. So the, adults can start pushing them in that direction. And if you look at eagles here, they'll just kind of flap their wings a little bit, just practicing those flight muscles. So can't fly yet, but obviously, it's kind of working out, preparing for the day when it can. Notice the coloration. I'll talk about the color in a little bit. Eagles, when they first hatch, are just dark. All right. Well, actually, when they first hatch, they're more of a gray. But in their first summer, they're just this chocolate brown all over, and they're going to gradually change. So if you watch this, and if you kayak the Delaware, you can watch this happening because you'll see plenty of nests. But once again, if you go to the Bashik Hill, right at the parking spot, on weekends, there'll be someone with a spotting scope saying, "Hey, would you like to look at bald eagles?" You can actually watch the eagles developing, get a little bit bigger. So here's on the Delaware, you can see some heads poking up. There was actually a third head. They just never all did it at the same time, but there was a little third eaglet in there as well. All right. So you're like, oh, okay, here we are in May. There's the adult hanging around. And then by the time you get to June, now you're saying, well, all right, that's the eaglet, but it's getting close. All right, so that's the question. When will they fledge? When will they develop the ability to fly? So if you live near the Bashik Hill, every weekend you could kind of like, ooh, in my little journal, here's where they are. They're getting close to flight. Like I saw them practicing. So here you can see how big it is. Once again, a lot of growth that has grown faster than any other bird on Earth can to get to that size, from hatching in late March, early April, into and getting to this size by June. Okay. Now, you may see more eagles than you think you do, and that's because they don't develop the fully white head and tail until about age 5. Age 5 is what everyone says, but a lot of times with age 4, you would think that it was a white head and tail, unless you were really close and you would say, oh, no, I can still see a little brown behind the eye or some little brown here. I'll show you some pictures, but a lot of times, a 4-year-old would look pretty white. And so between 4 and 5. So this is one that hatched that year. Look how dark it is. Okay. Once you start getting into the second year, however, all right, once again, they don't look like that at first. We'll see a lot of ones looking like this. All right, see, oh, I got some white on the back. I see some white here. There's white here. You're going to see a lot of these, especially ones from yesterday. And so if you wanted to, you could now look at birds and say, oh, I'm going to estimate you like you're 2.5 years old, you're 3.5 years old here. And then even here, there's a little bit of brown here. This isn't as bright as yellow it would get, so that's kind of probably more of a 4-year than a 5-year. All right, so if you ever see just a really big bird, like you might be confused by that. All right, it doesn't have white the way a bald eagle would, but it's certainly white. So that's probably a 2.5-year-old bird. You saw an adult take off there. And so the Delaware River and the Hudson are just great. So if you travel them, you'll be seeing eagles of all different ages. This eagle looks just dirty. All right, but that's because it's 4 years old. It's still got it's got brown, but it's also it's got white, but it's also got a lot of brown. So once again, that you might think it was like sick or something. No, that's just what 4-year-olds look like. Yeah. I should probably know that. I think I usually the text here is not only for you. It's like if I haven't given this talk in 6 months, I'm like, yeah, good question. I want to say like 30 years. That's what I want to say, but I'm sure I wrote it down somewhere so that I wouldn't. There's a line that I like in one of the Indiana Joneses where Indiana Jones goes up to Sean Connery, his father. He's like, I wrote this in my journal. It's like, you don't remember? He's like, I wrote it down, so I wouldn't have to remember. So I'm sorry, I'm sure I could find it, but I don't want to waste your time. So it's certainly, I think 30 years can be with a lot of birds. There's, this is the record in the wild. This is the record in captivity. Very often captivity can lengthen it a little bit. So they're going to be eating mostly fish. All right. Now, this depends, based on where they live, but certainly in this area, there's a lot of fish, especially like being in our area, like along the Delaware, there's the shad. The shad are coming up from the ocean. They're going to have sex. They're going to lay their eggs, and then most of them are going to die. So like the eagles don't even have to hunt. They're just going to be like dead floating fish by the gazillions floating around. So, the eagles, and they love it because this is when they're feeding their young, and there's all these like fish just floating to the surface. So that's great. But they can eat other things as well. So in the newsletter that I do for the Orange County Audubon, one of the articles for this next coming month is I have pictures where an eagle was chasing a seagull at 6.5 last week. There aren't that many fish because the water's frozen. So if you're an eagle, what do you eat? Well, anything you can. I mean, you got a 7-foot wingspan. You can eat a lot, and you can eat a lot of birds. And so ducks fear eagles. A lot of ducks are diving ducks. Not only do they dive to look for food, they dive to get out of an eagle's way. I've seen that where like an eagle's going down on a bubblehead. The bubblehead goes underwater, comes up. The eagle circles around, goes after it again. Even Canada geese they usually don't dive, but they can dive to avoid eagles. And eagles then can eat carrion as well. So they're opportunistic. So they can eat, they like coots. Coots are easier to catch than ducks are. If great blue herons have a nest, they can go after the great blue herons in the nest. They can even go after an adult, rarely. But they can eat mammals if they're hungry. They can eat, rabbits, muskrats, squirrels, including cats and small dogs. I hate to tell stories, but there's like this famous story of there was a kindergarten class that they would start off their day every day by looking at the eagle cam until the day that like an adult brought a live house cat to the nest for the young, and the kids were like traumatized and and that was the end of the eagle cam starting off the kindergarten day. But it just they eat a lot of this, and they do eat carrion, especially the young ones. Like in the first year of life, bald eagles aren't that good at hunting fish yet. So like a young bald eagle is good at catching fish off the surface, like a dead one, not so good at the live ones yet. So if there was like roadkill, an immature bald eagle is more likely to go after that. And back in the day, when bison were more common, as they were for obviously much of North American history, in winter, like dead buffalo was a big staple in eagle diet. Now this would be going off into a little aside, but when we talk about threats that eagle face, some of the threats that they face are from lead. But now there's often lead in fishing gear, like lead baits, etc. But there can also then be lead shot that's used to, kill deer or something. And you might say, well, how would an eagle get that? Well, the fact that they can go after carrion, that's a way that they can ingest lead. When eagles fly, especially if they don't all have the white, how does one tell? Well, very often they're holding their arms out straight instead of the vultures, which are going to be more of a V pattern. So that often helps with their identification. Okay. As we start getting, as they get older and older, so here you can see, you're starting to get the white on the head and on the tail, but still a lot of brown as well. So, that's like, here you can see one flying overhead, but like, oh, look, you can see signs of brown there as well. So, maybe the next time you're looking at bald eagles, not just notice it's a bald eagle, but then maybe, how old do you think the eagle is? Okay. So I try to make a bunch of videos about the the eagles and what they're doing for the Orange County newsletter. So let me just kind of hit the last two, and then we'll maybe start to wrap up. The last two. One was I took a bunch of pictures. It just happened to be Valentine's Day. And on Valentine's Day, I started seeing these pairs of bald eagles. So the question is, who are they? Are they the pairs from last year? And unless they were tagged, it'd be hard to know because it could be, especially if it was a mild winter and they're on a river where it's not going to freeze. They could say, hey, this is my nest. This is my territory. I spent a lot of time defending it. I'm going to spend the winter here. That's a possibility. Another thing with birds, though, is you may say the birds don't migrate because I see them all winter. What often happens is your summer birds went to Virginia and then Massachusetts, its birds came to here. So you might see a bird, that looks the same at your bird feeder in your area all throughout the year, but it might not be the same bird. So they might still be migrating. So it's hard to say. So these might be Canada's eagles that we see in February that have no intent on staying here, or they might be ours that just decided maybe, I can get enough food. And even when it's frigid cold and the waters freeze, there are still going to be some places like the Rio Dam or the Delaware River where the Lackawaxen comes in, where there's going to be at least some running water. And so these are great places to go in February because that may be the only running water that you see. And that not only will you see eagles, but you'll see a whole bunch of eagles in the same tree, potentially. So that was one of the things then in my February newsletter. Here is one of the nests at the Bashigal from last year, and I saw two eagles there. So here's the question. Are these the pair? Are these the ones who successfully raised an eaglet last year? The fact that they're in like the same tree, quite possibly, but it could be that these are Canada's eagles, and then ours were south. And now that brings us to yesterday. So yesterday, so there were at least 14 eagles there. I'm really excited about that. I'm also really worried about that, but I'll get to why I'm worried in a second. So I'll show you the video in a little bit, but like here's just a single frame, and I've numbered them. There's one adult with the white head here, but these are all immatures. So there's 9 immatures and 1 adult. I do a second frame, the same thing. And then so there's 11 eagles in the frame here. There's an adult and then 10 immatures. And throughout the day, I'll just play the video and you'll see pictures. There were 2 pairs of adults because there's 2 nests. There was a pair at the nest that we liked the most because that's the one closest where you can get the best views. But that was not successful. That's, we think, the pair from last year that did not raise young. And then the other nest also had a pair. So there were 4 adults and 10 immatures, like all in the same. So this was the one nest. And so like, I think that's the couple from last year, unless they were banded. It would be hard to tell. I'm sorry, did someone have their hand up before? Yeah.
What time of day did you see?
So I got there at 9:30. The hike started at 10. I'm trying to think if this was, I think that was right before the hike started. So that's probably a little before 10 in the morning. Yes, sir. Okay, and so then here's the second. So here's the second nest. There's one parent, and if you can see it, that's adult number 1 and adult. So there was a pair near their nest. So we had 4 adults and 10 immatures at least. And then this was just where the Bashikil's long. I was only in one section of it, so like, I don't know. So here, just I mean, that was amazing. So we had such a good hike. It was so much fun. We couldn't believe it. Like, oh, we're trying to go up the count. So what are they doing? I don't know. I did see 17 eagles on the Delaware, all kind of flying around each other, but they were in migration, and I just figured they're migrating down the Delaware. Here, most of the wetland is frozen, so they can't be getting much food, which is why we didn't see a whole lot of ducks, because the ducks had to be terrified because they're all that there is to eat. So a lot of the ducks we saw were diving ducks that can like go underwater if an eagle was getting too close. Like I said, they go after gulls as well. I saw one at 6.5 a couple days ago going after, like you can see like the gulls flying this way, the eagle's following it, the gull turns, the eagle follows it. So when there's more fish, I think the eagles will predominantly eat the fish. But right now, I mean, gulls or ducks, they're a big food. And so you can actually see them on the ice. So, here you have a bunch of immature eagles sitting on the ice. So if you go there, don't just look in the trees, look in the ice as well. It is my hope that the water melts, and a lot of these guys figure we can't fit 14 eagles in a half a mile, so let's migrate on our way and get north. And the reason I'm saying I hope that because we obviously would prefer that if multiple eagles make nests, that they don't attack each other, kill each other's kids because they feel territorial, that there's not enough food to raise two groups of eaglets. And if that's what they thought last summer when there were 4 adults, the fact now that there's 14 in the same space, obviously. Yeah, so like right now there are 2 pairs of eagles that are trying to lay eggs. I don't know what they're eating because the water's frozen and they've got 10 other eagles going after the same food that they are. So it was great to see so many birds. I prefer that they didn't stay and, you know, just let a couple eagles be successful there. Yeah.
And they're praying flying, or does it have to be, like a seagull would have to be on the.
So I've never, they can take it in flight because I've seen them go after flying ducks. Like the trail cam got like, yeah, there's the duck flying, there's the eagle right after. I've seen it going after this. So they can. Small birds are more maneuverable. Like just if you're big, you don't turn on a dime the way a small bird would. So I think they'd prefer to like get something very, yeah. But if they're hungry, I'm sure they'll try anything.
Juveniles will nest for a while, right? They,
Sometimes they make like almost like how younger kids might play house. Juveniles might do that, like kind of make a nest even though they're not breeding. But I don't think that's super common. So yes, I
He's threatening so much to the existing nest. Probably they would wouldn't attack the.
so I don't know. Eagles can attack eagles and eagle nests. Like they'll go after great blue heron nests. They would go, you know, if you had a hungry immature eagle and there was unsuspecting young eaglets in a nest, like they would eat. I don't think they say like you're my species, you're off, you know, off limits. But once again, that usually doesn't happen when there's fish because, you know, when fish are available, that's what most of their diet is. But we're not that time of year yet.
Last year killed the babies as a territorial thing, right?
Yeah, so what we think happens, and I like this is what we think happened is that 2 years ago, all right, so I think these actually have numbers with the DEC, but I'm just going to call it nest 1 by the parking area, middle nest, and then nest which is upper. So there were 2 nests for a while, and the upper one was way upper. But then a tree fell down, so the upper one came a little bit closer. And then an eagle's nest decided to go in the middle. And then 2 years ago, these eagles went after these eagles and I think got their nest. All right. Last year, I don't know, revenge or whatever, these guys went after both those. And these 2 nests failed, and this one only had 1 in it. So usually eagles have 2 or 3. So in fact, I'm not sure whether there was more violence that we didn't witness or weren't aware of. So it is a really it's not a big area to have 3 pairs of eagles. So we would assume territory, but interpreting eagles' motives, I'm not sure.
Juveniles probably won't have that pressure away.
If once juveniles fly, some might hang around the adults for a little while and the adults help feed them a little bit. But sometimes the juveniles just go like, hey, I can fly now. And not too long, they're on their way. And this wouldn't be like, hey, this is my territory. If they weren't getting enough food, they might kind of go off. And one of the neat things that I find anyway is a big determinant. So if you were at the parking area, like if you pull it across from the winery at the Bashakil, or you look across the way, you see this tree. Often the pair is in it, and then the big pine tree just to the left, that's nest number 1. All right. Yeah, I don't know what they're thinking. So in winter, eagles are used to hanging out in small groups because there's not that much open water, so they tolerate each other. But once eggs are laid, that's bad. So like, at what point do you go from I'll tolerate it to like get away from my nest? I think we're right around that point, but I don't think I can speak for the eagles. Eagles always look angry because of the ridge over their eye that helps protect them from sun. So when immatures land, all right, this eagle then will like, it starts making noise and calling. I don't like, is it upset? And it's saying, I'm not comfortable with this, go away. Like, I'm not quite sure, but it could be because I think we're at the time of the year where we're no longer tolerating, you know, such dense groups. But just, I guess then in summary, you know, I try to tell my students, You young people, I don't know if you, but like when I was your age, you just couldn't see eagles. You just couldn't. Like I would have gone so far. I remember the first time I saw eagles in the wild, I was with a bunch of birders, and I was like, oh, "Come here, come here, come here!" And we were on the Delaware. We were looking up, and they're like, "See that black dot?" I'm like, "I think so." And they're like, "That's an eagle." I went home. I was so excited that I saw eagles, and now they're so easy to see. And so it's just such a thrill that in just such a small period of time that they've come back from being so endangered. So we live in such a wonderful area, and literally there's at least 2 eagles nests 20 minutes this way. And I'm sure a lot of you could say, I live in Warwick, there's one of the, yeah. And I'm sure we could go around the room. And so this is such an exciting thing to see. So Earth did not start off with birds, nor did it start off with eagles. And these wonders of nature are just hundreds of millions of years in the development, and we get to enjoy them. And I hope that you do at this time of year. If anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to entertain them. One small announcement is we will not have a talk next week because it's spring break and the college is closed. So we'll be back here in 2 weeks. Yes, you had a question. Yes. Good question. Like ring-billed gulls, especially, a lot of them never see the ocean. Like there are a lot at the ocean, but they live inland a lot, and they migrate. And some like will spend part of their year away from the ocean, but a lot of them never saw the ocean. So we call them like eagles, because we use the word eagle. We assume they're all related. They're not. Like these eagles are related to these hawks, these eagles are related. And same thing, just because we call them seagulls, that, they're often found at the sea, but that doesn't mean they only have to be. So, yeah. Yes. Mhm. They do. They do, and I apologize. My YouTube channel has like 6,000 videos, which means I often don't find the one that I really want right at the time. I'm forgetting what I called this one. Oh, I'm not in here somewhere. There's a big lake in Pennsylvania called Lake Wallenpaupack. And there's just like about a month and a half from now, there will be bugs everywhere. They don't bite, they're called midges, but this is just midge breeding season. There's a gazillion, there's clouds of all of these midges. They lay their eggs. The adults only live like a day or 2 or 3. Well, a lot of birds are saying, I'm migrating. I want to hit that time when there's nothing but bugs everywhere. All right, because then I'm just going to eat, and that gives me the energy to keep on going. So they try to time it here. And there were seagulls everywhere. So you're absolutely right that they would follow garbage. But in nature, then there would be, kind of equivalent things like it's that time of the insect life cycle where there's bugs everywhere, and the seagulls are like, we want to be here. It's like a garbage dump. There's an insect dump, but they're going to eat. So, yeah.
Question about the bald eagles and Oil City Road, there used to be a nest years ago.
Yeah, I saw. Yeah, the nest is still there. I don't think it's active anymore, but I did. We were doing a hike. I think a couple of you were there, where we saw an eagle earlier this winter, right in a tree real near the nest. So they're still in the area. The wall kill's there. So even if it's not using that nest, there are eagles in the area. I'm assuming they're nesting.
Out there, they were the ducks that could be a rumor on the trail. But so that's not true.
They might be, but the fact they're protected federally. So what you could do to get rid of a bald eagle, like you'd get into trouble. Like I can't even, if a feather falls to the ground, it's illegal for me to keep it. So yeah, like if you love ducks, yeah, eagles maybe aren't your thing, and I could see that. But once again, being federally protected, I'm not quite sure what you could do.
Done by the
DEC, yeah, could be. I'm not aware. Maybe.
at Liberty Boost just a couple weeks ago, I saw 2 bald eagles together by that.
Uh-huh. Ooh, okay, great.
And then I saw a 3rd one. I'm not sure if that 3rd one was a pair. I saw them at 2 together.
Were they too mature with white heads?
Yeah.
Oh, great, great. Oh, okay.
sure if that's the one you're talking about, but it's at the field at like the farthest end of Liberty, that's where Owen property.
Mhm.
Yeah, like a diagonal. Yeah.
Yeah, next to the
Oh,
wall
they're
kill.
still there a couple weeks ago.
Oh, great, great. All right, yes.
So I think on one of the charts it showed songbirds as the most complex evolved creatures. Is that-
So I would like, that's real tricky, like as far as, like, it's easy to now assume better, but like, for example, if I were to have an intestinal worm, like I would oh, I'm so much, look at my big brain, you've actually lost your brain. But like, you know, it's an intestinal worm, it's doing just great as an intestinal worm, and actually getting a smaller brain was good for it. So like, it's easy for me to say like, I'm more advanced, I'm better than you. So like, I want to be careful of that. In the family tree of birds, the songbirds, that order is the most recent. Now, herons, their branch of the family tree goes back earlier, but that doesn't mean like a great blue heron goes way back. They've been changing over time, just as the songbirds have. But just as far as like groups of, I'm probably going to get, I'm probably going to, I don't know if this is good. But like, so for example, like as far as cultures in the United States, in the world, like Egyptian culture would be ancient. All right, Chinese culture would be ancient. American culture would be newer. Like, but that doesn't necessarily mean like more advanced. And Egyptian culture today isn't what Egyptian culture was 1,000 years ago. So this is just an analogy on the fly. So just if you were looking at like how cultures unravel, like you said, this was the newest. That, you know, that doesn't mean that the other ones like stopped in time from where they branched off, if that made sense. Yeah.
Kind of. So my question is there any speculation in the scientific community as to how birds will evolve in the future, or is it just kind of wait a few million years to see?
So one, I do have to go to a sword class, and I was hoping not to end on something pessimistic, but you forced my hand, so I'll end on this, and I hate to say this. So another one of my videos, another one of my songs is, we think that North America has lost a quarter of its birds since 1950. That's about 3 billion birds. So just, there just aren't as many of them. And that's just numbers of the common ones. We definitely know that, I mean, we used to have passenger pigeons. They were the most abundant bird in North America, more than anyone else, and we wiped them out. There used to be parakeets, even up in New York, the Carolina parakeet. We could list them. So yes, birds will continue to evolve, and there'll be new things in the future. But the biggest answer is like they're losing habitat, you know, they're being hunted. You know, we have regulations here, but I lived in South America for a while. There's places where you can shoot anything, you know, and you know, and if you're hungry, you do. Like a great blue heron, that's a meal for a family. And so eagles certainly are. And then there's climate change. So all these birds, like I just said, like they timed it. So like I'm going to come back from my migration. This is when I get the bugs. I eat all enough. But the climate changes, now the bugs are on a different cycle. You come back the same time, and there are no bugs. And so there are so many challenges facing the birds that I think that the biggest thing is surviving the threats that we're throwing at them, the new invasive species. That would be my first case. Good question. Well, thanks for coming. If you take a bit of a break, wherever you go, I hope you have a wonderful break. And best wishes to all of you. I hope you get out and, you know, get to enjoy all of this great wildlife we have.
Thank you.
Any questions at home? I see some things in the chat. Let me just see. Thank you. Okay. Thank you, everybody at home.
I have a constituents meeting.
Oh, okay.
But from your class, when you had the Bible people there.
Yeah.
they
Forgive me.
asked you-
If you don't mind, let me just stop. Be right with you. Okay. So.